I'm gonna say something I feel shouldn't really be controversial, but surprisingly may be viewed as such in some spaces. Video game preservation is important, actually. I've always argued strongly that video game preservation should be a key focus for the industry, as time erodes everything, including long since forgotten video games. Yet the industry at large seems determined to march forward with an attitude that the past should only be preserved if it's profitable. You see this all over the place. How many video games from your past can you actively play on modern platforms legally? If a game that you love from the past is lucky enough to receive a remaster or remake, which brings it to modern platforms, then that's fine. But if your favourite titles from the past are trapped on their original platforms, then you're kind of out of luck. The only options are bare bones. The first is to either hunt down a physical copy, get a console, and get a controller set up on a modern display, all of which are not easy to do in the modern era. Or the other option is to sail the high seas online and hunt down a ROM or disc image for the game that you really want to play and experience. You need to whack it into an emulator and hope that the emulator does a good job of bringing that game to life for you. And my question here is that really how it should be in the current day and age? A strong example for me is that I've always been a big WWE gamer. Since playing Warzone on my Nintendo 64, I've bought and played every WWE game. Those games have changed so much over the years to the point where the modern WWE games don't even slightly resemble the classics. This means that if I want to go back and reminisce about games like WWE SmackDown Here Comes the Pain on PlayStation 2, I can't officially. There's no avenue where I can legally purchase a copy of the game on modern systems and boot it up to play with friends. No remasters of these games have ever been done, and because the publishing rights have been handed around so much, it's unlikely that it will ever happen. I either have to try my luck with an emulator or buy a 25-year-old console and hope that it still operates. And this seems crazy to me because this series is so long and extensive, and some of the games in it are really great. Some of the games are genuinely among the best on their platforms, but if I hadn't gone out and invested in the hardware and games themselves, I wouldn't be able to access them or play them as they were originally intended. Those games are effectively lost to time, and newer fans probably will never get to experience them. But of course, the argument some will say is that license issues around those titles makes a remaster or re-release impractical. And that might be the case, but it doesn't make it any less disappointing for fans of series like this. But there are plenty of cases where hugely popular video game series do the same thing for less obvious reasons. I talk about Doom a lot on this channel, a franchise where classic games have been re-released numerous times, and it still overlooks aspects of its history. You can't experience the console versions on modern platforms officially. These have their own quirks, unique levels, and even completely new features that the PC version has never received. The PS1 version in particular is so unique, yet modern Doom gamers have to use fan source ports or emulators to experience it. It feels odd when ZeniMax and id Software have created a port that encompasses so much of Doom's collective history in one package, yet choose to leave out what for many was their gateway into the series. And it's not just those console ports that I'm talking about here. Doom 64 was left to hang on the Nintendo 64 for over 20 years before finally being remastered by Night Dive. For a long time, Doom 64 was seen as the odd one out in the Doom series, yet now it's fully appreciated and playable for modern fans. But the same can't be said for various other digital copies of Doom over the years, which have been pulled from various marketplaces and made inaccessible if you weren't there to purchase it at the time. But then of course there are other Doom titles like Doom RPG, Doom RPG 2 and even Mighty Doom, which was shuttered in 2024. Now don't get me wrong, I don't like Mighty Doom, but it's part of the franchise's history and Microsoft made it completely inaccessible when they took the servers offline. That's part of Doom's franchise that's gone forever until Microsoft decides to bring it back, if that ever happens. I bring this up as an example of how even the most celebrated of franchises can relegate entire sections of its history into the dustbin without much effort. It happens in the blink of an eye and most gamers don't even know it's happened until it's too late. In an age where people are buying video games from digital storefronts, it's very troubling that so many video games are being shuttered in this way. At least back in the day when you purchased a game on a cartridge or disc, that was yours forever, or at least until you broke it. The publisher and the developers couldn't retroactively make the experience worse for you. Now though, that game that you're buying at full price isn't yours forever. The game you buy can be patched, altered and changed with no warning. The only option to avoiding this is to remove yourself from the online components, which in itself degrades the overall experience because so much of modern gaming is tied to that. As various digital storefronts have popped up over the years, so they've also started shutting down. The Xbox 360 marketplace is the biggest recent example of this. Throughout the 360's lifespan, many games were released to the console's digital storefronts as exclusive titles, indie titles, fan-made games, and even full retail releases of classic titles, some of which have not been re-released to other platforms. Yet in 2024, Microsoft pulled the plug on it all. No longer could you access these games if you hadn't already purchased them. The Xbox 360 digital store shut its doors, and with it, access to a whole treasure trove of titles and games that will likely never be released on any other platform. Nintendo has also done this pretty aggressively over the years. The Wii store played host to many great titles and was updated with a huge catalogue of games from across multiple consoles, even non-Nintendo ones. It even played host to WiiWare, a small indie house service that served as a point of entry for small developers to get their games out there. Yet the service and the Wii store was shuttered in early 2019, and with it, all those unique games and titles went with it as well. Sure, they exist on the internet if you know where to go looking, but for most people, those games and that content will never be accessible again. Nintendo's also repeated this with their Wii U and 3DS shops, gutting those consoles while also closing any points of entry on unique, interesting, and sometimes fun experiences for these consoles. I need to point out that if you bought these games years ago, then they're yours to re-download, until the ability to re-download games that you've already bought is removed, and trust me, it's not going to take long for one of these companies to make the decision to try that out. To come to the decision that the cost of keeping these bare-bones services alive so that people can re-download their purchases isn't worth running anymore. Gamers won't be compensated, they won't get that money back, those games will just disappear into the ether and it'll almost be like they didn't exist at all. Whenever I boot up my Xbox Series S console, I wonder how long it'll be before Microsoft turns off support and the Xbox One follows the 360 into becoming a husk of a platform. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that console manufacturers should run hugely unprofitable platforms that they've long since moved on from. What I am saying is that without official preservation, many games will be lost in the coming decades due to these kind of service switch-offs. But of course, it's not just the platforms which have an issue here. These days, video games are released with online components that require maintenance and upkeep, and that costs money that publishers aren't willing to sink into games that aren't making money. It's not uncommon these days for when a game doesn't meet sales expectations or maintain a profitability deemed acceptable, those online services that were used to sell the game to players suddenly become a ticking time bomb. Eventually those services will be shuttered, and the effect on the game depends on how heavily the title leaned on those services. In the best case, a game gets delisted and is made unbuyable, with online services turned off, but at least is playable in part if you have a physical or digital copy. This is actually a common one in the modern age that you see in popular sports titles like Madden and FIFA, as well as Microsoft's Forza Horizon series. The game is still playable offline, but a large part of what made the experience great is ripped out of the game, leaving a hollow shell. Perhaps the biggest example of this is Bungie's Destiny 1. It released back in 2014 and was an online shooter that garnered a huge following. Its success brought about a sequel in Destiny 2 in 2017. In the years since, Destiny 1 has had its online components shuttered, and the game is very much a husk of its former glory. A lot of fans of Destiny decry how badly Bungie has treated a game that many consider a classic. But that's not the worst fate. In certain situations, games are taken away from players and rendered completely unplayable, making that full price seem like a bad joke. This one is currently less common, but is likely to become a bigger problem in the coming years as a lot of live service games released in the early Xbox One and PS4 eras mature to the point where maintaining the service is beyond profitable. Ubisoft drew the ire of the crew fans when it shut down that game's servers and rendered it completely inaccessible, even though people still loved playing it. It gave rise to the current hot topic of Stop Killing Games, an initiative that is seeking to compel game companies to at least make their games playable when services are pulled. But as has been seen in the discourse, not everyone feels that is a fair obligation, and the industry in particular seems very keen to avoid being lumped in with that long-term obligation. It goes a long way to explaining the mindset around a lot of modern games. They aren't viewed as items worth preserving, but money pits that once dry need to be sealed off and forgotten about. But it raises the spectre of what happens in 20 years' time. How many of these games will still be accessible? How many people will be able to play The Division, for example? Will you still be able to load up Forza Horizon 5 and play the events? Of course you won't. Those servers will be long shut down and the games unlisted for sale. It'll almost be as if they never existed. To fans of these games, the clock is always ticking on how long they have left to play the games as they were intended. And perhaps the biggest kick in the teeth is that not even buying games on discs can save you from this conundrum. The recent trend of putting download codes in boxes or Nintendo's weird cartridges that download a copy of the game to your Switch too show that you're not safe from the threat of games becoming unplayable, even when you have a physical copy. What happens 30 years from now when someone wants to put that cartridge into the modern Switch console and the game is inaccessible because the servers have been turned offline? The issues facing video game preservation are wild, and there's a lot of unanswered questions. It's not simply one issue that dominates this discussion, it's a broad spectrum of different topics and issues, which makes the whole thing so disappointing. Video games are a hugely important medium, and to think that so much of it is being gated off or in danger of being erased by sheer incompetence is just crazy to me. It's 2025, and getting your hands on classic or retro games is increasingly more costly. The routes to accessing them increasingly removed as companies like Nintendo desperately try to tighten their grip on their back catalogue of games, chasing ROM hosting sites and shutting down services that try to help gamers reach their old games. To them, it's an exercise in profit and IP protection. They want people to subscribe to their online gaming service where they control the content and how people experience it. But these services like Microsoft Game Pass, Nintendo Online Service, EA Play and whatever Ubisoft's is called, seriously, who actually subscribes to that one? Are so slow at bringing in classic games that it almost feels deliberate. They want you to pay monthly to access the games which otherwise can't earn the money. For these publishers, it makes sense to shut down unofficial ways to access their old games. According to the Video Game History Foundation, only 13% of games released before 2010 are readily accessible to gamers now. The other 87% are either lost or critically endangered. That number is only going to rise as games continue to blink out of existence completely. The current Stop Killing Games initiative is a big welcome step, but in truth, there needs to be a full culture change across the board. Otherwise, future generations may not be able to fully appreciate what video games were or the rich history that they offer up. Digital games and online services shouldn't be the reason future generations can't have access to play games of today. All we can do as gamers is continue to bring attention to classic titles and hope that one day we can reach the point where these mega billion-dollar companies start to fully appreciate how important history is. So yeah, video game preservation is important actually.